This is Public Sector Voices with Emily Rogers. On today's show, we're joined by Chair and Chief Executive of the National Association of Local Councils, Councillor Sue Baxter and Jonathan Owen. The NALC works to support local councils and raise awareness of their work and needs, in turn empowering communities to tackle local issues and have more control. It's really great to speak to you both today. Obviously, you will have very different roles and perspectives on things. So first of all, before we start, I'd like to hear from you both separately, just to kind of get an idea about where you stand. So let's start with you, Sue. How have you found the past few months?
A bit frenetic at times. Journey into the unknown, feeling of responsibility, I think both locally and to support our councils around the country, and the need to step up and lead, both personally and for NALC. For me, this all started in the second week of March, when every year we hold a lobby day, when our members descend on Parliament to lobby their MPs on key national and local issues. And I had a couple of meetings with ministers that day. And I came away from those meetings quite clear that we were really on the brink of something quite exceptional and something that was incredibly serious and that they'd need our help with. And so I came home and felt I needed to concentrate on my own community. And locally, we've got a couple of very active Facebook groups. And in a couple of days, there were a huge number of posts from people wanting to help and actually suggesting quite unsafe things. So it was quite apparent that we actually needed to corral all that interest together and put a sort of process in place to support our community and protect our vulnerable residents. And that's what we did. And I was really busy at that time. We delivered 5,000 leaflets within a few days, and we set up a help desk and lots of support for our local residents. But what we did locally here wasn't any different from what our other parish and town councils have been doing around the country. So it was quite good, really. So once I'd set that up, I was able to step back and actually look at the broader picture and what the rest of our councils were doing. And also, I think a little bit about NALC itself and our staff and how they were coping and how Jonathan was managing to steer the NALC ship. And then we sort of moved from that into our new normal, this world of virtual meetings. And that in itself, I guess, was quite a challenge. We lobbied to be able to hold virtual parish council meetings, and we're able to do that now. And that's now become the new normal.
Yeah, and your community is Worcestershire, isn't it? So what percentage would you say you spend with that community in comparison to what you spend with NALC, or do the two go hand in hand?
The two very much go hand in hand, because one thing I really love about my job is the fact that I can draw this golden thread all the way from talking to a minister one moment down to what's happening locally within Worcestershire, within my own parish council, and my next door neighbour. And I find that an incredible experience.
Yeah, definitely. And what about you, Jonathan? How's it been for you?
Yeah, it's been a very difficult few months. I think it would be fair to say. I think Sue was spot on, really. I think in the middle of March, we suddenly became aware that things were going to get really, really very difficult, and we were in very uncharted territory. And quite rightly, people were beginning to focus on their own communities, as Sue has outlined, and also to focus on your own sort of personal health and well-being and mental health. I think everybody was very anxious at that time. And as the chief executive of a national body, we were concerned about the rising rates in London. We took an early decision to go into lockdown as an organisation to test out our systems. And we did that, and by and large they have worked well. And I think that's really the thing I reflect on mostly over the last few months is how our councils, councillors, clerks have really worked so well through all this, balancing their own personal issues and challenges, their caring responsibilities, homeschooling and all that, with working to support their communities. And I'm really proud of the work that the whole sector has done, but particularly, my staff in the National Association, who have worked really well, I think, to support councils through these difficult times. And the main way we did that really was through an online resource, a web page devoted to coronavirus, which we were updating daily as government guidance came out at the beginning of the pandemic. And that had something like 130,000 hits, which is an unprecedented number of hits for our website. In fact, it collapsed for a few days at one point, but we managed to sort that out. So I think it's been a very busy few months, a very challenging few months, but I'm really pleased with how our councils have responded and how all the staff within the sector has responded and supported their communities and their councils.
Yeah, and I really like the fact that both of you will obviously be approaching the organisation from different angles. So I wonder if you could both kind of sum up what you would say the local council landscape is like at the moment, in light of everything that's happened, because I'd be interested to know if you have different kind of understandings or different approaches of what's happened and how it looks right now.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, I've been really impressed by the speed with which so many councils in our sector responded to this challenge. It was a real call to arms, a call to action, and the vast majority of them responded really well. As you probably know, we have about 10,000 parish and town councils across England, and they vary dramatically in size from, large towns like Weston-super-Mare or Weymouth or Salisbury City down to really small parts of the country, rural areas with parishes with maybe 20 or 30 houses or even less. So it's a very diverse sector. But I think what has been shown by the last few months is the importance of those councillors being active on the ground and doing things, which I think Sue's council has been a really good example of. But early on in the pandemic, we kind of collected case studies of what councils were up to, and we've published about 400 case studies on our website, which illustrates the kind of things they've been doing, setting up volunteer networks, setting up food banks, arranging deliveries to vulnerable people, a vast range of things, really. And I think that shows, I think, that the sector is as relevant as it's ever been, probably more relevant. We've been around for 100 years or more, and yet we have constantly changed and evolved. And I think if there is a positive thing to come out of this, it's that our councils can really support their local communities, are closest to their local communities and their residents, and can help and move really quickly. The other lesson, I think, is that our sector responded really quickly, whereas perhaps other tiers of government or health agencies were a bit slower. So, for example, where I live in Suffolk, a small town council, a leaflet came through the door on the Tuesday, I think, after the lockdown, calling for volunteers to help support vulnerable people and to identify vulnerable people. So I think, I think the pandemic has accelerated what's already been happening within the sector, which is that our councils are doing much more. They're raising much more funds to support their local communities. They're getting involved in things that they hadn't have got involved in the past, such examples as promoting health and well-being, or helping tackle loneliness, or build dementia-friendly communities. And I think the pandemic will accelerate that trend, and hopefully we'll be able to be at the very centre of building back stronger communities. I think that's the challenge for the future, is how we build stronger communities and how our local councils can play a pivotal role in that.
Absolutely. And I think wherever you are and whoever you are, we've all kind of learnt the value of that community aspect. What about you, Sue?
I think one of the things that we sort of have demonstrated through this is our flexibility and our ability to be able to adapt. And I think being smaller and not having the pressures of the other tiers of local governments probably helped with that. And I think our presence, if you like, has grown within the local community and also within government, because I know Rob, our Secretary of State, has recognised the work that our sector has done. And for me, having sort of changed the landscape, now the challenge is to keep that going. But I do definitely think that our communities now, Whereas before, the parish council was some sort of odd thing that used to keep the grass mown and the playing fields mown and the village hall going. Now they're actually in there and part of the community. And I think that's a really positive change.
Obviously, the mission of the National Association of Local Councils is to help to make local issues easier to deal with at a local level and generally make sure local councils are more effective for their residents. And how do you do this? It seems like more of an idea than a tangible thing you can do. How is it that you go about doing this?
I'll answer that. I guess we have three elements to our mission, really. Firstly, we're focused very much on lobbying government and civil servants about the sector. And that's really important because although we are small, we are the first tier of local government. There are 10,000 of our councils, 100,000 councillors all supporting their communities. And government needs to understand the needs of our sector and to make sure that laws are passed that make the work of councillors easier in delivering things that their communities want. And that was, I think, particularly important during the pandemic, insofar as central government was passing legislation and regulations to affect local government generally, but often forgot about our sector. And it was really important that we were there shouting and saying, you've got to make these changes for our councils as well. And we were able to do that in many ways, from extending remote meetings to our councils and to parish meetings, and to making sure that guidance on opening of facilities was relevant to our sector as well. So that's the first bit of our role, really, is lobbying government to make sure that when they pass laws, they make our lives easier, not more difficult. The second bit of work we do is around providing a lot of advice and guidance to councils on what they should be doing. So for example, a good example would be delivering neighbourhood plans. We put out advice on how to do neighbourhood plans and that kind of thing. And we also respond to queries about legal issues that councils might be facing. So a lot of kind of day-to-day support to our councils. We're organised through 43 county associations, so a lot of the day-to-day issues are dealt with by colleagues in county associations across the country. We provide a lot of the sort of national resource they can use. And then I think the third bit from me really is that we are very much focused on improving and developing the sector, building its capacity. So providing training and development opportunities for councillors and for clerks, a national award scheme, a bit like sort of hotel gradings to be able to guarantee that councils are working well and effectively. And then probably the other thing that maybe Sue might want to reflect on is just sharing good practice between councils, because they are so diverse, they are so different, spread across the country, but they can all learn from each other.
Yeah, Sue, would you agree with that?
Yes. I mean, to me, good practice is the cornerstone of what we're doing. And the providing a platform for networking, because to be able to learn from each other and develop our skills and have those sort of the case studies and leading by example, to me, are a really important facet that NALC is able to provide.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing as well about what's happened at the moment, because nobody's been in this situation before, so there wasn't really any good practice to learn. This is kind of more about learning on the job. But now that we've all been through that is something that can be shared amongst all different councils. So obviously the last few months have been extremely challenging for councils of all sizes, but there is an argument to say that it has accelerated the devolution agenda and made that more likely to happen, or more necessary, really. Would you say that's true, Sue?
Yes, in a word. I think, the government's agenda about levelling up and community engagement, I think what we've certainly demonstrated over the last few months is that we are able to engage with our communities. We're able to look after them and help them and support them. So we wait for the white paper, the devolution white paper, to come out. I've had positive conversations with the government minister, Simon Clarke, and yeah, I agree.
And Jonathan, do you think that the devolution agenda will ever kind of trickle down as far to like the parish councils, to whereby they do have the control of their immediate area, or do you think it's more likely to be the bigger organisations that are going to be able to benefit from this?
Oh, I think very clearly the smaller organisations and local councils will benefit from devolution. I think government has been very clear, both the current government and previous governments, that they want to see devolution down to the lowest possible level. And we've been seeing that quite a lot across the country, especially in unitary areas over recent years, where many services that have that were the responsibility of upper tier authorities have been passed down, from libraries to public conveniences to play areas and to other facilities. And I think we've demonstrated as a sector that we're able to deliver those things, and that it makes much more sense for local parks or local play areas or local community centres to be run by the people who live in those communities rather than by people from another part of the area. I think I'd probably maybe just flag up one slight risk to this whole sort of drive towards devolution, which we strongly support. Many of our councils have, responded really positively to the opportunity to take over new services, and have run many of them on a commercial basis, leisure centres or whatever it might be, letting out properties and facilities. And they've done that to generate income, to keep their small share of the council tax, the precept, down, as they've been encouraged to do by government. And then, of course, along comes a pandemic, and a lot of those facilities are closed down. The income dries up, but our councils still have to pay many of the wages of the staff employed in those, and cannot use those that income to support their other activity. So that is quite a big impact on many of our largest councils, who are very dependent on some of that income. And unfortunately, the government hasn't really come forward and said that funding will be available to our sector to compensate those councils for that loss of income. Instead, they've said that we should access funds via districts and county councils and unitary councils, which is fine in theory, but that sector hasn't received enough money to compensate it for lost income or for additional work as a result of the pandemic. And so there is not money to go around down to our level. And I guess there's a real risk that will discourage people from getting involved in devolution. So that's something that we're lobbying very hard on, that our councils should have some dedicated resources. And I'm also really pleased that recently Cornwall Council, the Unitary Council in Cornwall, has announced a scheme to provide compensation to local councils in Cornwall. And we hope that will be rolled out by the Local Government Association and others, so that everywhere provides support to the first tier of local government where they need it because of loss of financial income.
Yeah, and Sue, what is the local government funding like at the minute? Like, how are councils going to recuperate those funds, and are they going to?
Well, I think to survive, they will recuperate it, either through spending some of the reserves. I mean, that is what our general reserves are there for, events like this. However, this is an exceptional event, so councils might struggle. I think one of the ways they'll struggle almost is lost opportunity. Projects that we were planning are going to have to be deferred. I mean, the way that we are funded, we're 100% funded through our precept. And also, all of our funding is spent within the parish. So it's actually I always think that our accounting is quite easy, because we can demonstrate to our residents quite clearly that if you live in a bandy house, if we provide this service for you, it's going to cost you this much on your council tax. But, there is definitely has been a cost impact. I think most of our councils will weather the storm. We might have to put a few projects back a year or two. And I think we will have to put up our precept next year and put up our council tax.
And do you think it's the role of central government to kind of get those councils out of the situations if they're at the point where they won't be able to weather the storm?
I think in the ideal world, we would have a dedicated fund for the councils that are worst affected. I think Sue's right. The vast majority of our sector will be able to cope with this without any real difficulties. But there are a small number of councils that will be affected adversely and significantly, and the best solution would be a national fund to support them. But I think the government has rejected that so far, so we're looking for those councils to be able to access support from their upper tier colleagues.
Yeah, and going back to devolution and the structure of it all, how would you, in an ideal world again, how would you structure the entire local government system to kind of facilitate devolution or to make decisions kind of better placed in the right hands? Would you keep it the way it is, or would you change things if you were able to model it?
It would be great to have that magic wand that was able just to create a complete new perfect local government system. But I think there's clearly going to be significant change over the next few years. Certainly all the messages coming out from government and from many other bodies such as the County Councils Network and the District Councils Network is that there is definitely a trend towards unitary government, that unitary councils with enough scale and resource to deliver and support their communities. And I think probably broadly that's the right way for the country to go, so long as that is supported by a really strong network of parish and town councils that can do the small things that make people's lives so much better on the ground, from organising events to allotments to play areas to bringing people together in dementia cafes or whatever it might be, leaving the unitary councils to focus very much on those big strategic issues that they are best placed to deal with. But it's our sector, a strong parish and town council sector across the country, and we'd like to see the creation of many more local councils, particularly in urban areas. But having a strong first tier of local government supporting our unitary colleagues would, I think, be the best solution for the country going forward.
And what do you think, Sue?
I agree with Jonathan. We do have a very, very complex local government setup at the moment. I think if I was going to design something from scratch, we wouldn't end up with what we've got now. However, we are where we are. And I think any government who tries to reorganise local government has a huge challenge. But certainly the messages that we're getting at the moment is that unitary is the way to go. But I do feel very strongly that where unitary authorities are created, they should be totally parished, because you still need to have that local delivery and that real community engagement. Those services need to be delivered at the most appropriate level.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also kind of adding to this idea that it becomes a less centralised system where everything is done in London or in government as well, because it's more people on the ground, really, isn't it? People like yourself.
Mm.
I mean, parish councils must not have the resources that the bigger city or county councils might have, but they still manage to pull off, the successful remote virtual meetings, which we saw councils across the country do, and continue their duties to a really impressive standard. How did they manage this? Was this something that you guys stepped in to help with, or is this something that they did alone? What do you think, Jonathan?
I think it's tremendous how the sector has responded to the challenges, and that the average age of a parish councillor is 61, and they've really adapted quickly to the new arrangements. And if you'd asked me, 6 months ago, would we now be holding so many meetings remotely? Moving much more onto digital platforms, embracing social media, I'd have said, yes, that's going to happen, but over the next few years. But within the space of 3 months, we've moved to that. We've played a big part as a national body to lobby government to enable our councils to do that, because previously they weren't allowed to do it. And we've also been putting out a lot of advice and guidance on how to hold remote meetings effectively. And I think it's quite interesting. We, as a national body, we have a kind of an assembly that meets quarterly that brings together a representative from each county across the country. And that used to be a huge exercise, really. People getting on trains in Northumberland at 5 o'clock in the morning to get to central London for 11 o'clock meeting, then getting back at 10 o'clock at night or whatever it might be, or staying over. So hugely costly exercise. We've now moved to remote meetings, and actually our experience is that they are in many ways sharper. People are much more focused on the business. So I think that will be something we will want to continue in the future, not to completely replace face-to-face meetings, but you could imagine a situation in which you have one face-to-face meeting a year to sort of get to know each other and identify what we want to focus on over the next year, and then subsequent work is conducted remotely. The other thing we've been doing is meeting weekly with our colleagues in county associations. So there's staff across the counties who we used to meet up with fairly irregularly, who we're now meeting weekly for a Zoom meeting, which means we're much more in touch as a national organisation with what's going on the ground, what we need to be doing to lobby government on their behalf, and what resources and support those 10,000 councils need. So I think a lot of this is making us much more responsive and adept as an organisation.
And I just find it fascinating because if this awful thing had never happened, we might have been carrying on with these practices that we were doing for the next 20, 30, 40 years, never realising that there was a better way to do it. Was the rollout of the virtual meetings successful where you are in Worcestershire, Sue?
Yes, definitely. I think one thing we have to recognise, though, is that the whole country has sort of joined the virtual world. I mean, that's how I talk to my grandchildren now. So in a way, it was almost a sort of natural progression. But I think one thing that we have to recognise is that the pressures that we have as parish and town councils are different to those upper-tier authorities. Our county council, I live in a 3-tier authority, and our county council has been struggling with social care. Our district council has been trying to process all of the government business grants. We've had different pressures. Our pressures are looking after the community. So I think that has probably helped us and given us a little bit more space to be able to respond quicker, although we don't have the resources.
Yeah, and we've already touched on this slightly, but apart from the virtual side of things, is there anything else that kind of has come up over the past few months that you would definitely encourage councillors and members of local authorities to take further and continue with when things do hopefully go back to normal? Jonathan?
Yeah, I think, it's very clear that the pandemic isn't going away anytime soon. So it's really important that our councils continue to support their communities to deal with future emergencies that take place. So I think we'd want them to maintain and enhance all the support networks that have been set up. We've got hundreds of thousands of volunteers getting involved, and they need to be nurtured and hopefully used to support other community actions as well as dealing with the pandemic. We want our councils to be at the centre of helping towns and communities recover. So many of them now will be helping with risk assessments of facilities that are being reopened, whether that's parks or markets or community facilities. And I think we need to demonstrate that local councils will be at the centre of rebuilding our lives and economy. And there'll be a lot of issues around planning system, how that operates in the future to build COVID-secure streets and other things. I think it's about our councils continuing to do really great things for their communities.
Absolutely. And would you say that there are some opportunities to come out of this, some positive things? It's obviously so easy to get bogged down with all the negativity that we hear all the time. But Sue, what do you think about the potential that this might bring, or the opportunities that we might be given as a result of this?
Yeah, I think we certainly can use the learning from this to our advantage. I mean, Locally, we've recruited over 200 volunteers. Now, what I want to do is to keep that enthusiasm, to keep those volunteers engaged, and find sort of local projects that whet their appetite, that we can deliver the benefit of the community. And the other thing that we had to do very early on was actually change the way the council works, not just in terms of virtual meetings or physical meetings, but our processes. So we were able to streamline those. And I think we actually work far more effectively now than we used to. We're doing more and having less meetings. We're actually making better use of our resources and better use of our time. So
yeah, and the galvanisation of local people, especially if it's younger people who are wanting to get involved with the community, that's only got to be a good thing in terms of more people being involved with the local authority.
Yes, because certainly the volunteers that we've got engaged are far younger than our parish councillors.
Definitely, and I think that's a step in the right direction.
Yes, and I think it's accelerating some earlier trends. So, for example, many of our councils have been getting very involved with the climate emergency, which again attracted younger people to sort of get involved in local projects. So I think there's a real opportunity here to build on that and actually make our communities much more diverse, get more people from all backgrounds involved. And to get a better understanding of what our community needs. The Royal Society of Arts did some public survey work, which concluded that the majority of the population don't want to go back to how it was before. They want to see many things change. And I think we need to harness that and really make sure that our councils are at the forefront of building back stronger, better communities, which will not just help with the pandemic, but help to build and continue to build that community spirit and to help our communities tackle and respond to the climate emergency, which after all is probably as big as a pandemic in the longer term.
Yeah, well, thank you not only for coming on, speaking to me, but also for bringing so much positivity with you, and the nice things that we can talk about really do make a difference to people, I think, when you turn on the telly and it can be so negative. So thank you for that. Is there anything that either of you would like to add before we finish?
It's all about people, really, isn't it? It's people being active in their communities. And I've been really impressed, as I said, with how our councillors and clerks have stepped up and worked with local residents to support their communities. In terms of where we want to go as a country, I think we want more people working more closely together, treating each other with respect and with dignity. And I think if we do that, then the future is going to be better as a result of this horrid thing that has happened to us.
Absolutely. Well, let's hope so. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
On next week's episode, we'll be joined by Councillor Anna Firth, founder and director of Invicta Academy, helping kids catch up with their education after COVID-19.